if the sound person thinks that, oh, you can fix that in post, I don't want to hear that.
No.
I don't want to fix it. I mean, I may have to, but I don't want to.
Yeah. Why don't you fix it now?
No, you don't need a key. It's just that it's stuck. The bottom is stuck. Kick it a couple of times and it might open. It's just because of the water.
So, Jonathan, you have a tendency to make me watch movies that I'd otherwise never watch.
See, there it is. that makes me very sad, but it's unfortunate. No,
but it's a good
because I
thing.
want you to see these movies, and I think they're good movies. You know, they're fun movies. Sometimes, well,
I have. You know how when your wife tells you let's go to the gala, and you're like,
do I really want to do that?
But then you get there, and the food's good, and it's kind of fun, and you're like, oh, you know what? I'm glad I went, because I never do this stuff, right?
What are your favorite kind of movies?
I am, you know,
Action
it moves. I am an action guy. It moves around a bit, but you know, lately I've been loving just epic kind of sci-fi adventures. I went through the whole the Marvel universe. That normally isn't my thing, but I kind of started getting into it, and I was like, I could do this. And then, but traditionally, I like movies like The Usual Suspects, or
that's a great movie. Yeah.
Good crime thrillers with good performances and twists, and you know, sort of. But here's what I was going to say. With Francis too, but more so with this one, I have an aversion to sports films, and that's not for any other reason than being intimidated by sports talk, because I didn't grow up with sports. I don't follow sports. I'm not a big sports fan. I've worked with athletes. I've shot stuff for, you know, Major League Baseball and all that, and I love it.
Yeah.
But I don't know teams, and I don't know anything. And so I gotta stay away from it, because it doesn't interest me, and I make up excuses. But then I watched a movie like this.
Yeah. Without Limits.
Without Limits. I was going to say Limitless. That's a different movie. And then I realized it's not about sports necessarily. It is. It's about a really great athlete, but it's so much more. It's perseverance and what humans can do, and you know, and then you start thinking, okay, well, it's not, you know, you don't have to be a sports fan to watch sports movies. And I think that this movie reminded me, and I like this because it's like when you go to a restaurant, you never order the shrimp because you just had shrimp once when you were a kid, and but then you try it and you're like, damn, this is good. I think I've acquired the taste.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a funny thing, because I mean, I like sports, but I don't generally care about most sports movies, because seeing a sporting event is actually more interesting than going to a movie about a sporting event, because it always ends the same way. You know what's going to happen.
Right.
You know the underdog is either going to win or something is going to happen that's going to satisfy you at the end of the story. And, you know, it's the Bad News Bears or some kind of thing like that. And so I generally am not a big sports movie goer, just like you. And I never thought of this as a sports movie when I got involved with this one. I mean, I knew it was a sports movie, but it's about a sport that I wouldn't watch. You know, it's about racing, you know, about
track and
field, you know. But it was really about the guy. I mean, the guy was fascinating. He was interesting. And I had read and seen a lot about him, documentary films. And you know, his work ethic, the kind of way he did what he did was unusual, and that immediately got me interested.
And I like how you don't really quite ever. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, go see the movie and then come back.
Oh, we got a lot of spoiler alerts. Yeah.
Right, so spoiler alerts. But I like how you never actually go into why he has this thing where he runs away. You hint to it. He got chased as a kid, you know, crowd. He gets, you know, but you never really reveal that fully. And I kind of like that, because you just kind of know that there's something else that's poking him that makes him always have to give everything he's got. And at the same time, he's talented, and he's got how Sutherland's character is talking to him about what talent really is, that his bone structure and all that stuff is actually really, he's kind of destined for this stuff. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the movie begins at where it ends.
Yeah,
almost.
right.
I mean, not exactly where it ends, but
the Munich
fairly close. It's the Munich Olympics of what was it, 1990?
70 something.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
72.
Yeah, okay.
And
because in 76 would have been the next one that he.
And 72 was the famous
Montreal.
Olympics. Well, 72 was the famous Olympics in Germany.
And Munich, yeah.
In Munich, where the Israeli the hostages were taken and a whole bunch of Israeli athletes were killed, and there's many stories about that event. Which
one called Munich. Spielberg,
one
right?
called Munich, exactly. The whole story of how the Israelis tracked down every one of those guys. But this was, and it just happened to be within the structure of what actually happened in the story. Once again, it's a movie, as I've said to you before, it's a movie about real people, and it's stories about real people that you want to kind of know a little bit more about what made this guy tick. Why was he so relentless in some ways and such a purist?
Yeah.
What was interesting to me about him was that, his coach Bowerman used to tell him to draft off other runners which is, running
Get
behind
them.
somebody so that you maintain your.
It's not as much resistance.
Yeah, it's less resistance on you, and it's easier, and you don't take off until the very end. I mean, you use all of the ideas of resistance to improve your time and to make sure that you get the best advantage out of the race. And what was so unique about this guy was he only believed that if he was out front, he wanted to be flat out front, working as hard as he could from beginning to end. That was an unusual fact because most runners don't think that way.
He didn't want to win with a strategy.
Yeah.
He wanted to win by brute
exactly
force
right.
and
He wanted to
just-
win because he was the best,
Yeah.
not because he outsmarted everybody.
Which is what I like about how Munich happened for him, because he didn't win that race. He didn't even place.
Yeah.
He didn't even medal. But he I think there's an announcer or somebody who said, some people make the race and others win it.
Yeah.
And he kind of made the race
Yeah.
because he was doing
Yep.
his thing, but it didn't get him to victory. But overall, he was a better runner.
Yeah.
So you learn a little bit about sports that way. And what I also like towards the end, which is kind of that little twist for the mainstream, that Bowerman is one of the co-founders of Nike, and I had no idea there either that.
Well, there are a number of interesting aspects to that in terms of the story. We were very close to a lot of the people who were originally on the track team. In fact, Phil Knight, who was the owner of Nike and created Nike, was on that team. He was one of the guys. He was actually running.
Runner.
He was a runner in those days, and he trained with Bowerman, and Bowerman had a piece of the company, and wound up. Now the funny thing is, you see the house where Donald Sutherland is working in, which overlooks the entire bay of in
Oregon, right?
In Oregon, yeah, but and it was amazing because we filmed in Bowerman's actual house.
Oh, nice.
The house that we
that's
were in
cool.
was really Bowerman's house.
Oh, okay.
And when Bowerman lived there back in those days, he just had this little house which overlooked the whole river valley, the Willamette River Valley. And after he became successful with Nike, when we were there, everywhere you looked from his house, he owned.
He just bought the
He
whole
just
place.
bought the whole view.
I'll
you know.
stay here, but I'll buy everything.
But he bought everything around him. I mean, he really became quite wealthy, and that was the place.
Oh, I bet.
But fascinating that we did that there, and it was a lot of fun actually working in the guy's house because he was still around. He was still alive when we shot the movie. He died a few years later. He was I think he was probably in his late 70s or early 80s even when we met him. But he and his wife were still alive, and that's where he was.
Did he actually make the cleats with a waffle iron?
Absolutely. That's not an apocryphal story. His wife told us the story too, that he actually used an old waffle iron for the original lasts, things that he was doing with the shoes. And he would make the shoes for all his runners. And he started obviously with spikes, but then he figured out this way of creating these rubber, these rubber soles on shoes. And that became, that had a lot to do with the design of the Nike shoe.
Did you ever talk about the Chuck, like
the swoosh?
What's that? Do you know?
I don't know exactly. I'm trying to think. Yeah, we did talk about it, and it was something that came up. I'm not saying that Bill Bowerman was the guy who invented the idea, but it just was something that the guys in the group, which was Phil Knight and his associates and Bill Bowerman, came up with to put on the side of the shoe. And so you see him actually kind of pasting those things on the shoe.
Somebody once told me that it was the goddess Nike's wing or something, but
could well have been that. I can't tell you about that for sure.
So
now, a few interesting things also. Remember, the movie was directed by Robert Towne. Now, Robert Towne is known primarily for his writing. He's directed several movies, but writing is his strength. And he wrote Chinatown, one of the great scripts ever. He of course he wrote this movie, but he wrote several other movies. He wrote and directed Tequila Sunrise just before this movie. And the first, I'm trying to think, what was the name? The first movie that he did was also a movie about female runners. I mean, it was a fascinating movie that was done several years before. So he was always interested in track and field, Robert, and so this was a story he always wanted to tell. And Robert Towne was very friendly with Kenny Moore, and Kenny Moore was one of the runners on that team. And in fact, Kenny wrote the story about his teammate, who was Steve Prefontaine, and he was the co-writer of the script with Robert. I mean, he wrote an original version of it that Robert then put his artistry onto and made the movie. But Kenny was with us the whole time we shot the movie, as were a lot of other major track athletes. Frank Shorter is in the movie as a character, and the real Frank Shorter was around when we shot it and was very helpful to us. We had major, anybody who knows anything about track and field would have known the runners that we had working on the film as advisors. And most of them were people who had been with Bowerman and working at the University of Oregon. They were all runners.
How much did they have to do with the story as opposed to just technical correct?
Well, it was mostly about technical correction. Yeah. Kenny's a good story guy. I mean, he wrote for Sports Illustrated for years and many other magazines. He wrote for Life magazine.
For accuracy, I should say.
Well, the accuracy came pretty much from Kenny, because Kenny was there for every one of these events. He was right there. He was on the team with Prefontaine. He knew him. He knew what happened. And of course, the inner life of Steve Prefontaine is certainly created, but created out of incidents and people that we knew, like Mary Marks, who was his girlfriend. I mean, the woman who played his girlfriend was still alive. She's actually played a bit part in the movie. I mean, we had people who knew him and who had run with him, and they helped inform the way the movie was.
She was really well cast, by the way.
Yeah, she's great.
She was really good.
Yeah, Monica Potter. Monica, and it was I think one of the first things Monica had done. Monica came from the Midwest. She came out. She was a late casting choice because we were looking at a lot of different people, and
she was she was adorable.
Yeah,
she was pretty, but then she had that innocence that you needed for that, abstinence and stuff.
And just other aspects of it. You had Billy Crudup playing Steve Prefontaine. Billy trained for that movie.
He's good too.
Trained hard. I mean, he really built his body up, and he could, he was able to run quite well, at least in one lap. He could do a lap.
Right.
He could do a full lap. I don't think he could have done 5,000 meters, but he was able. He was able to do enough to look absolutely convincing as Prefontaine. He looked just like him. I mean,
it was uncanny, really. I was looking at old pictures.
Yeah, he really, really did look like him.
So tell me about the Munich stuff. I know that must have been pretty difficult to put that scene together.
Yeah, it was hard because, well, it wasn't
sequence,
hard.
I
It was
should
just it was a sequence that was it was something that we all knew because we all remembered it. We remembered those moments watching television. It was kind of, you know, there's certain things you remember on TV, like when I mean, if you're my age, you know, you remember when John F. Kennedy was killed, you know, and you were watching television,
9/11 and things,
you know,
like
those
that.
kind of things. Well, the Munich Olympics was a big deal, and I remember as a kid I was watching it and never took my eyes off the screen. I mean, I was on the screen the whole time because it was a story that was unfolding while we were watching it, and most of it, I mean, it certainly happened pretty much the way we describe it, and we used a lot of real footage. All of the documentary footage and the news footage and everything that was on the televisions were real.
From the actual Olympics.
That was from the actual
That's cool.
event.
So then the interspersing of the actual tighter shots where the actors are running and you're cutting back and forth.
Well, the race, which is the 5,000 meter finals, there's an interesting story that goes along with that. You have to know that when we came out to do this movie, there was another movie that was in production around the same time we were, called Prefontaine, which was the very same story. Huh. And these crazy things happen. It's happened with me, with Francis. There was a television movie called Will There Really Be a Morning, exactly about Francis Farmer. In this case, there was another movie. We had nothing to do with each other.
Were you aware of it when
we
you were
aware of it?
Yeah.
Of course we were.
Yeah.
We were aware of it, not when we were developing it, but when we were ready to go into production. We've heard that they were also going into production.
Oh.
They were being funded by Disney. We were being funded by Warner Brothers. Two separate companies.
And
right?
the studios didn't pull the plug or say, hey, you know, Disney's doing this.
No, and as I say, this happens. There was when Earthquake came out, there was another movie called Dante's Peak, which is about the same subject, you know, or other things like that. I mean, these things happen. You know, you can't know why that happens, but it does.
But you were saying that they were shooting the same time, and we were talking.
They were shooting more or less the same time. I don't know exactly, and they were shooting. But because we were friendly with the Bowerman family and the runners who were on the team, we had access to the University of Oregon where it all happened. They didn't. So they shot their movie somewhere in San Francisco in a different place.
Okay.
They didn't shoot it in the real locations. We shot everything in the real locations in which it took place. Not that that's a key to whether the movie was any good or not, but it was a fact.
What was the budget for the film?
The budget, I'm trying to think, the budget for that, I would guess, was probably in the $15 million range, I would think. Something like that.
I mean, it's a good budget. It's in the 90s.
It was a good budget, but for a studio, it was a low budget.
Right. So my question there is, you're at least giving the appearance of full stadiums. I mean, those are big tasks and expensive things to do. Did you actually populate it, or did you have?
Well, no, we did. It was an early example of crowd
copy pasting.
Yeah. I mean, we did a little bit of that.
Yeah.
To a couple of things that we did, which was kind of interesting in terms of how we got the crowd, was when we shot in the stadium in Oregon, we actually had cutouts of you know, we had maybe 50, 60, maybe a little more real people, and then in the deep background we had cutouts of people on and you know, I mean, you really don't notice. Mm-hmm. When we got to the main race, and this was the big thing, the race that took place in Munich, which was the Olympics, there was no way, you know, we actually couldn't get. I mean, we had to find a stadium where we could do the infield and create Munich. Well, we found a field out in Los Angeles, not too far from Los Angeles, out near past Pasadena, at a college, but it was a full-size Olympic stadium, and we used that as our Olympic stadium because the infield was very much like the infield in the Olympics. For the stadium part, we had green screens all, you know, very high and all along one side, and we had to populate those green screens with crowds. Okay, well, we found out, and this is again, we were in competition, as I said, with another film. Well, ABC ABC Television basically was the company that ran the Olympics on television at the time. Okay, so ABC owned all of the footage of the race that they had shot. Of course, there were other outlets around the world that did it. You know, the BBC had a feed, other people had a feed, but ABC's feed was the major feed, and it had, you know, it was the one that almost everybody in the U.S. saw when they watched the races.
Right.
And ABC was tied to Disney. So we couldn't get any of that footage. They wouldn't let us have.
I was going to ask if that already had happened.
They would not let us have any of their footage.
They want to give it to their people.
So we had to figure out a way. Two things we had to get. One was getting footage that would be on television, the TV footage, because we couldn't use their footage either. And the other was doing the stadium, what we were going to do about the stadium. And we had to recreate it. Well, we wound up being able to get a feed from like the BBC actually, and it's the same race. You know, it's just different camera positions, but it was exactly the same race, and that was the way it was on television in most of the world. So we had that for the television sets, but we also, unfortunately, we didn't have anything to use for the backgrounds, and because TV footage,
it's moving.
It's not only that, but it would break up terribly. It wouldn't look good. It would be, the quality was awful.
Yeah.
Well, an interesting thing happened along the way while we were making the film. We were making the film, and at the Munich Olympics, there was a movie that was made of the Munich Olympics called Visions of 8, and it was directed by 8 different directors, each one from a different country, and each one took one event, and they filmed that event in their own way. And they weren't alike. I mean, they were filmed differently, the viewpoints were different, everything else, but they did. And so there were 8 events that were shown in this movie called Visions of 8, and they were shot with 35 millimeter camera, beautifully, perfect shots. Anyway, the 5,000 meter finals, which was our race, was not one of the races that was in there. And, they it was filmed by Walper. David Walper Productions was the company that produced Visions of 8. Turns out David Walper's company was owned by Warner Brothers.
Oh, nice.
So we go to David Walper and we say, we thought, well, one of the things we might be able to do is find some of their footage, look through the footage they had, see if they had footage of the stadium, since it would be in 35 millimeter, really good shots of the crowds, and maybe we could move the crowds from those shots onto our green screens and build our crowds. So we went to Walper, and they had crates of film, but nobody had ever gone through the film that they had from 72. They literally had all of this stuff, archive footage, but no one had cataloged it.
Yeah.
So and we still, even though they were a Warner's company, we would still have to pay them to license the rights to be able to use any film we used. So we made a deal with them. We said, look, what if we get an assistant editor? And our assistant editor will go through all of your footage, millions of feet of footage, and basically label it and help you to archive it. And for that, you'll give us the footage that we want to use. Yeah. And they agreed. Okay,
that's great.
So our assistant editor is going through batches and batches of film, and they're all different events. One's it might have been the javelin throw, or it might, it would have been the decathlon, and then one was, some other race or some other event. Well, he's going through the stuff, and I get a phone call, and we're already in production now. And I get a phone call from the assistant editor. He says, "You're not going to believe this." And I said, "What?" And he said, Visions of 8 was originally going to be Visions of 10. There are 2 other events that were completely photographed that they decided to drop out and never used on the film. He says, and one of them was the 5,000 meter final. We couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like having a gift put in your lap. We had the entire race on film with the real people doing it, with Prefontaine, with Lassie Viren, with all of the great runners that were in the thing. And we had all of the background of the audience with the real guys in front. Yeah. So we wound up getting all that film. We processed it and timed it with our own film when we finally we needed it. And all of the audience stuff was the stuff we put up on the screen. And in many cases, we even had shots that were directly out of that film that we didn't even have to touch. All we had to do was retime them and color them properly, but they had everybody. So we had the entire race. So the wide shots that you see in the movie are the real people, and the close shots were our actors. And every one of our actors looked just like the runners.
That's cool.
Not only that, they were all runners. So that they watched the footage and they planned out the race so that they were in the right positions at the right time. And it was fascinating to see them do that, because they had to figure out how far this runner was from that runner, where Steve Prefontaine was at different sections of the race. And they basically were able to match those positions for the shots that we needed. One of the funny things was that the guy who played Lassie Viren was one of the fastest runners in the country at the time, and his time was as good as Viren's time was back in '72. Crazy. So I mean, we had real runners, you know. I mean, it was pretty amazing.
I love that. So this is, Tom Cruise produced this, right? It's his company.
It was Tom Cruise's company. I'll go back. Let me give you a little history of that. I think Tom originally was interested in the story, and years before, and always was attracted to sports things. And I think the idea and the notion was that he would play.
I was going to ask why he didn't play, because he would have been the right age, and he
wasn't really the right age. He was a little too old even then. So, I mean, you got to remember, Steve Prefontaine was probably 19 years old, 18 years old. Really Tom was already in his 30s.
Was he already?
I think, well,
he came off a Top Gun right before that.
Yeah,
right?
But he was not a kid. I mean, he was, and he recognized that he probably was too old to do it.
Right. Okay.
So we had to find somebody else, and so it turned out it was his company that did the movie, and he was involved in the process of getting it set up. And I think because we had a deal, the Cruise's company had a deal with Paramount, we had to take everything to Paramount first. Mm-hmm. But as soon as Paramount heard that Tom wasn't going to be in it, they weren't all that interested in doing a sports movie with people that they didn't even know.
Right.
So we had to find a way, but we got them to allow us to take the movie elsewhere, and we checked and found that Warner's was interested, and we wound up doing it there.
How did you pull that off? I mean, sometimes they're basing that decision on some sort of data, and why would Warner Brothers say yes to a no-name?
Well, I tell you, I think you have to understand these things are complicated, and I think Warner's wanted to have a relationship with Tom. Tom was at the top of the world right then. They figured if they have a relationship with him by being part of that movie, and as long as it wasn't too expensive and we didn't go over a certain number, they make the movie, and maybe Tom would do a movie for them some later date.
Did he do Mission Impossible yet? The first one?
No, he hadn't done. Oh no, I'm sorry. He had done. He'd done the first Mission Impossible.
Yeah, okay.
But this was in between the first and second Mission Impossibles.
And how did you get to
In fact, he was doing, when we were shooting this movie, Tom was not around because he was in England doing Eyes Wide Shut with Stanley Kubrick.
Oh.
So he wasn't even available during that period. Okay. He wasn't around when we shot it.
So how did you start working with him?
Well, what happened was I had known Paula Wagner, and Paula was Tom's partner. Paula had been Tom's agent originally at CAA. And when Tom decided to start his own company, he took Paula with him and made her a producer. And they became producers together. So they started a company called Cruz Wagner. And, I mean, she didn't have experience as a producer, but she had a lot of connections, and she knew everybody.
Yeah.
So they had a deal at Paramount, and I met Paula, and we knew each other from other things that we had done, and she talked to me and asked me if I was interested in working with her on the movie. So
Now, what movie was the last one you had just made?
it was 96, that's right. No, we were shooting it, it came out in 96, I think. So I had just done, I was producing a pilot in Italy, and I was doing other things, TV pilot. And I was working on television movies, and I had done some directing. And by the way, on Without Limits, I was also the second unit director on the movie.
Okay.
So the crash sequence that was done,
You directed that?
I did that.
Oh, nice.
Because on the same day as I was doing that, Robert was working with Bowerman up at his house, so we couldn't be in two places. So I went out with the crew, and we shot that whole sequence that night. I did a number of other, directing other shots that we did in the movie, but beauty shots, things that that had to be done at certain times, those kind of things. But in any event, I had been doing some directing and also, producing, a TV pilot on
Paula
television.
called you and said she wanted to work with you on that. And then how did, years later, you guys both came back around and did Marshall together?
Well, we got to know each other pretty well. While what actually happened was, after I was working on Without Limits, when the movie was finished, Paula said, "Hey, what about you coming over to Warner Brothers? To Paramount, and working with Tom and I at our company, and you can, we'd like you to kind of like run the company, the physical production side of the company. I mean, you hire people and you get involved in the projects that we do, and it sounded like a great opportunity."
Yeah.
And I'd met with Paula and Tom at the time, and we hit it off. I mean, Tom, I hadn't really had much contact with Tom during Without Limits, but afterwards we became close because he loved the movie and he was interested in everything that we did to make it. And I wound up working with them, and I did that for a few years. But
Vanilla Sky was the last movie that you did together?
Vanilla Sky was not the last, but we did that afterwards. Yeah, I mean, the last movie we did together was a movie called Suspect Zero, which was a kind of a dark, almost a horror film. Not exactly a horror film, but a pretty unusual movie. But we did that later. But anyway, that's how we got to work together. And I wound up having an office with Cruz Wagner and
on the Paramount lot.
On the Paramount lot, and I brought in some development people to work with us to pick projects and read material, and also once we had things going, to start putting them together.
Now at this point, Eisner's already running Disney, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Eisner's already at Disney.
He's already. So who's running Paramount at this point?
At this point, it is pretty much Sherry Lansing. Okay. Sherry Lansing was the head of the studio at the time, and I knew Sherry Lansing because I had done some work over at 20th Century Fox, and she was at Fox before she came to
Everybody kind of gets passed around, and
so you wind up meeting the same people as you go out the revolving door. You know, I mean, it's just the way it is.
What do you think you learned from the process of making this film? I think that was our first sports film, right? And
it was the first, really, and only sports film.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned. Robert Town was a huge sports aficionado, as I said. I mean, he loved watching sports, and he was fascinated by the whole process of it. In fact, in the opening scene in the movie, we're in a trailer, which is supposed to be at the Olympics, where a guy is calling the shots.
He was
camera 16. That was Billy Friedkin, the director, Billy Friedkin, because Billy that's what Billy had done before he became a director. When he lived in Chicago, he used to be a live TV director.
Oh, there you
so
go.
We called it.
I know how to do this.
I'd worked with Billy when I was an assistant director, and Robert knew Billy very well. So Robert called up Billy and said, and Billy said, "Oh, I want to do that. I want to play that role." So he said, "Okay, come on down."
It's his Hitchcock moment.
Yeah. So he came in and he was great. I mean, he really knew how to do it, how to call the shots and call the cameras and all that kind of stuff. But he was fantastic.
Yeah.
And that was just the opening shot. It wasn't the first thing we shot. It was one of the last things we shot, but it was the opening shot of the movie. Mm-hmm.
That's cool. What was the worst thing that happened on that film?
Well, initially, I have to say it was a pretty good experience all around. Conrad Hall who was the cinematographer, was amazing. It was great. Our production designer was somebody that I had brought in, Bill Kreber. Bill Kreber he was a veteran of the film business, and Robert didn't know him, Paula and Tom didn't know him, but Bill had done movies going all the way back to the Greatest Story Ever Told. I mean, he was an art director in the old studio days, and he did all kinds of movies. He did movies like The Towering Inferno and those kind of movies, But I knew him, and he was still around, and I knew he was the right temperament for somebody like Robert Town. So I brought Town in to meet him, and it was they got along great, and Bill did an amazing job. He came out there. We had the real feel that we had worked on, but he had to do a lot of work. All of the locker rooms and everything, we built some of the stuff, and he was terrific. Now, on the other hand, Conrad Hall knew Robert, and Conrad Hall was one of the giants of the film business. I mean, one of the great cinematographers of all time. I mean, he was just really amazing. And Connie was a good friend of Robert's, and had done, I think he'd done Tequila Sunrise for sure, which was, as I said, the last movie that Robert had made. But Conrad was known as being, an artiste. And when I brought it up to the studio at Warner Brothers, they were very concerned. They said, "Oh, we know he's great, but he's slow. You need somebody who can really move. And this guy, he doesn't have a reputation for being fast, and we need to be on schedule. We don't have a lot of money." It was all that kind of stuff. And I sat down with Connie Hall and talked to him, and we hadn't hired him yet because the studio hadn't given us clearance, and they had asked me to spend some time with him. And anyway, make a long story short, Without Limits is 98% of the movie is exterior. It's about running on a track. Yeah. It's not a movie where you're going to be concerned with the lighting of. So we wound up, I said, and I talked to Connie, and he said, look, he at the time, everybody was shooting everything on Steadicams and, all kinds of new equipment. He didn't like any of that stuff. Mm. He said, a crane I'll use occasionally, Steadicam, not all that much. But, he really liked, he was old-fashioned in a good way. I mean, I don't mean his lighting or anything, or the way he shot was old-fashioned, but he just liked getting pristine, beautiful shots, and that's the way he worked. And give you a good example of that was, let let me finish the story.
Yeah.
So I'm telling the story about Conrad Hall, and I went back to the studio and I said, look, I talked to him. I talked to Connie. I spent a lot of time with him. I really believe he's going to be great for this because he loves Robert. He knows about sports, and it's all exterior. So it's really all about, daylight. We're going to be shooting in daylight. We're not going to be shooting, where we have a heavy lighting situation. So it shouldn't be a problem. So they, grudgingly said, okay. And because Robert was adamant. And, I don't think Robert would have won the day, actually, because he was a relatively new director for them. But, once we all talked about it and we said, look, Conrad's going to be great. We had a meeting with him. It's all going to work out. And it did. I mean, Connie was great, and we were basically on schedule all the time. I'll give you an example of the way Connie lit the film. We had a scene early in the movie where Prefontaine is winning a high school race, and it's the first time one of these coaches has ever seen him. And the coach comes out to the race. Well, Connie decided, for us, basically, that the best time to shoot this race was at dawn, just as the sun is coming up. And he had been checking charts, and while we were shooting other things, and he was saying, look, we were very lucky because we had very good weather almost all the way through. We didn't have any real weather issues. So we were getting clear skies and pretty days. So it looked pretty good that was the way it was going to be. And the indication was the next couple of weeks it was going to be clear and sunny. So he went out and would check the night before. He'd literally be outside waiting at dawn for the sun to come up to see exactly where it was at a particular location we had chosen. Because he wanted a shot that was Prefontaine coming over a hill by
the shot you're
himself,
talking about.
and the sun is behind him, and the sun is just coming up behind him. Well, this is a shot which you have maybe 3 minutes to get, and you have to be in place. So we planned it out, and literally the scene takes most of the scene takes place after that shot.
Right.
But that shot was the first shot of the sequence where you see Prefontaine in silhouette coming over the hill. You'll see him in a second.
Yeah.
That's the right. So he's coming over the hill. So we get there literally at 4 a.m, maybe even earlier. I don't know. The guys start lining up. We get everything set up. We get the location. We put our camera in position, all in the dark, knowing that Connie knew exactly where the sun was going to come because he had planned it. So we're all waiting there, and we had to be ready for the shot when it happened because we weren't going to get too many takes, because it wasn't just after Prefontaine. About
the rest of
about 10 seconds later is the rest.
You got to give
back.
it that delay, otherwise.
So we had to have all of that. Anyway, we had the camera ready, and literally we got it in one take.
Nice.
I mean, we probably shot it again, but the one we used was the first take, just as the sun came up.
Great.
It was a perfect shot. Okay, that sequence was our half a day. We had half a day planned for it, but once we got that shot, and the rest of the sequence went very quickly. It was all exterior, and we shot the rest of the coverage, which wasn't very much. We were basically done. Well, we knew that we had to plan something else for that day because that wasn't a whole day, but it was all we had. In order to get the sunrise, we had to do it at that time. So we made a company move to another location. And it was a location where we had a tiny little scene. It was a scene where Mary, Prefontaine's love interest is in church. And she's in the front of the church, and he comes in, he walks in, and then he walks out. He sees her, and he walks out. No dialogue, but...
In the film, this is after Munich.
That's right. Yeah. It's after Munich,
Yeah.
and he sees her in church. Now, this was a throwaway. We didn't... this would have been maybe, an hour. What are you you're not gonna spend a lot of time on that. Well,
yeah, but it's interior.
This is the one chance Conrad Hole has to show up what he can do.
Oh,
and he's got lights and shafts of light coming in, and he's got lights everywhere. Yeah. And literally that one shot, or those couple of shots that we did there, took 4 hours.
Yeah.
That was half a day. doing that. So it actually wound up being fine. We didn't overshoot the day, but we just barely made it. I thought we were going to be out early.
For 10 seconds of the final product.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But, that was the one day where he really had a chance to show his stuff.
So the Paramount execs were right. You were also right because there was a lot of exteriors.
Exactly right.
So how much say do the executives have? Because I don't do studio movies really. I mean, I've been in exterior, kind of involved on the fringes with friends of mine and all that. But I'm not really there, producing studio films. How much say do the executives have over crew? Because I didn't realize that you as a producer and stuff had to run crew choices by them for approval.
Not all crew choices. They didn't ask me about who was the set decorator. They didn't care who was the operator.
Just DP, director.
But the DP and probably the production design, the director, of course. I mean, the director was part of the package that we took in, which was just Robert, who was writer director, and basically, but DP, they want to know who that's going to be. The key people they care about are the people who could potentially slow them down. Not even the designer as much, because the designer is doing all their work before you're actually shooting. Most of it's already done when you get on set. They've already chosen the location, picked the set.
Yeah,
that's all done.
Right.
But the DP can slow you down.
Yeah.
And they want to be sure that they have somebody who they can count on not to slow the process down, especially when they're dealing with a director that they don't really know that well. So, I mean, if it was if it was Oliver Stone, they're going to go with who he says, because they hire Oliver Stone. He's done it enough, But in this particular instance, they didn't. So the key hires that they cared about are the cameraman, which was probably the only major crew position. The accountant, production accountant, very important.
On budget, on time.
But also knowing, and the production manager. So we had a production manager they had to approve to be sure that it was somebody that they were comfortable with and they felt could manage the company.
What about
one of the good things?
About the AD?
Well, the AD is usually the direct, almost always, and it's part of the Directors Guild. The first AD is really the director's choice. The director gets to pick.
But they're in charge of keeping things moving.
Well, they're in charge of keeping things moving. And if I brought up an assistant director who didn't have plenty of experience that they could check on, they would have had a problem with it. But generally, they're not going to pick somebody for you. They're going to let me, as a producer, especially a producer who had a lot of production background before, pick it. I was a first AD, so they knew that. They knew I was going to be watching that, and I was going to look for somebody who they trusted. And it turned out that they were totally happy with the guy we had, but they want to be on top of those things, and they're going to care. Just like, I mean, the difference is if you're doing an independent film, very often you have a bond company, and the bond company does pretty much what the studio does. They want to know who your accountant is, because they're going to be responsible for overages. If you go over, so they want to be sure you're pretty well, you've got all that handled. I mean, one of the things about a film like Without Limits, and most of the films that I have tended to work on are, they're not huge numbers of car crashes and stunts and all that stuff. I mean, there are, there were stunts in this, and there were other things, but not as many as you might have in some other films. Those films are films that they're going to be much more, on hands-on. The studio is, because the studio. Those are movies that easily get out of whack. If something goes wrong, it goes badly wrong.
Blow a house up once, you don't get it.
You don't get it, you're done.
Right.
I mean, all of that kind of stuff is very, very bad, and they don't want to know.
Weren't you telling me? I don't know if it was on the last, but you're telling me about a scene for another movie that would. What was it, like a boat or a car or something?
No, this was in a TV pilot that I was working on. Actually, it was for Warner Brothers, and it was before that, and I was the production manager on this, and we had 3 cameras on a like a cigarette boat coming up a ramp. I mean, it was in the marina here in L.A., and the boat is supposed to fly up the ramp, and so we had a stuntman riding it, and crash. It comes out of the water and literally smashes on land. We had 3 cameras on it, And you know, what you normally do is you get everything set up. You only get, you know, if you're doing it for television, you're not going to get a second crack at it. We don't have two boats. We only have one. So, you know, if you were doing a feature, you might, yeah. So you get one boat and three cameras, and that was it. That's what we were allotted. Anyway, we get out there, we shoot, and at the end of the shot, you know, the cameraman on the first unit, the AD would say to him, "Did you get it?" "Got it." You know, guy's second camera, "Yeah, got it." Third camera. Well, the guy had absolutely gone pale. I didn't know what the hell was going on. So I run over. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I didn't load the camera. The main camera. He had somehow forgotten to load the camera." I mean, it was hard.
And for
almost
those
unbelievable.
of you who live in an era where this is what you shoot on, loading the camera is, there's no film in it.
No, there's no film.
That's what he's saying.
That's what he's saying.
Literally the old, make sure there's film in it.
He never threaded the camera. Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, so we only had the two side cameras, and they had to put the scene together with those cameras. But I mean, these are very rare.
How
rare
often did that guy work after that?
I don't know, but I would imagine he had a hard time.
A little less than before, probably.
Yeah, no question.
Boy, no, you know, I always say this to the actor friends and stuff. You know, when you go out and you audition for something, you know, be damn sure that you can really be that role, because anybody can bullshit an audition. When you got to do 30 pages for a character, that's when the truth comes out. So it's like, you know, you might have talked yourself into that camera job, but you fuck up on something like that, that's a kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
That'll make you feel bad.
But, you know, I mean, some of the interesting things that happened in this movie really happened before we started, because we were casting the movie. We had Billy Crudup, who was an unknown, but he was great, and you know, he was perfect for it, and we knew that. But Bowerman was a big deal. Who we were gonna have play Bowerman, and it was gonna mean a lot to that was going to be the cast member that the studio cared about, or you know, people like that. Certainly that part, because it was a big part, and we needed somebody who had some not only acting chops, but was also probably a name of some sort, a name that was known.
And Sutherland was pretty
good. Oh no, Sutherland was great in the role, and he was well known, but he was not Robert's first choice.
Oh,
and Robert was looking at other actors. I think one of the people we were talking about was John Voight. John Voight was a possibility. He didn't want to do it. Somebody else didn't want to do it. And it came down to just, you know, we had to make a choice. And Donald was willing and wanted to do it and was fascinated by it, and Donald is a very I mean, he's a sensitive guy, and he cares, you know, he's an actor, and he cares about how people feel about him. And he knew, because the word gets out pretty quickly, he knew that he wasn't Robert's first choice. In fact, he knew that Robert didn't really want him. So, but Robert finally agreed after we all talked to him. We said, "No, he's the best guy. You know, he's really going to be great." And Tom called Robert, and Robert said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think he's
That's
right."
That's kind of tough to go to work when you know that the person directing you doesn't really want you.
Well, it up until, you know, I knew very early on, you could see it from Donald, that he had a sense before we started shooting, even on the first day, he felt very bad, and he was uncomfortable because he knew Robert wasn't really thrilled with him playing the role. At least that was the way it was at that time. And ultimately, I mean, the great thing that happened, of course, was once Donald started working, Robert turned around 180 in a minute, you know, but it still took Donald a long time to feel comfortable that Robert liked him. It was kind of like, you know,
boy, I don't know that.
Do you like me? You know?
Yeah, now watching that movie now, you would think, you know, he really was an amazing choice, and that speech he gives in the end was perfect.
Yeah, no, he was the best choice. Actually, he was the best choice, and he you know, he embodied Bowerman. He was exactly the right guy. But it was just one of those things where you're dealing with a director who wants to make a choice and doesn't know. And it was tricky. It was very hard for Donald.
I had a thing. I directed this little short. It was a kind of a for hire thing, but I ended up really liking it. It was about a true story that happened and a hate crime. But there was an actor that came on and in the auditions that the person who brought the project to me was kind of talking about and me wanting him to be part of that. And he was the guy, like the love interest. And anyway, long story short, I just wasn't like physically, his appearance just didn't hit me as like I wanted somebody taller and more chiseled and, just did the way I imagined the role. And I was really kind of fighting the guy on it. He's like, look, man, he's really invested. He really wants to do this. And I'm paying for this. So let's just, it was a small thing, right? And I actually talk to that actor and because I'm a pretty upfront guy.
Sure.
I'm not gonna like go talk behind your back and not tell you to your face. So I told him, look, I don't think you're the right choice, and maybe we should consider that you should just take your writing credit, because I think he had co-written it, and let's just do that. And he got really offended, and the guy talked me into it, and then we did start. He kind of insisted, and I said, okay, you know what, I'm not gonna push back anymore. But it did create that dynamic for the first day where he was sort of, we didn't know what to say to each other and everything. But then on that first take, that first scene, which was a really nice kind of intimate scene, he opened his mouth and started, talking and playing with the actress. And, in an audition, you see the guy delivering lines and you kind of have to imagine the rest. But now you're seeing him with the actual actor, and they're performing together, and there's actual chemistry there. And I'm like, oh my God, I was so wrong about this. He did it so well, and there was chemistry there. They were really cute together, and
look, it's great when that happens, and you hope that that's gonna happen every time you cast. You're also looking to see that there's chemistry between. I mean, if you have a girl, and a guy in a scene, you want to be sure they have chemistry together. And sometimes there's no opportunity to get them together before you're ready to shoot.
Yeah, but now I'm sitting here questioning, well, what the hell am I? Am I an idiot? Like, are my choices shit? Because you get schooled like that, and you think, man.
But you learn something. I mean, I imagine you learn something.
Oh, you do. Yeah, you learn that you can't just make up your mind and be firm about it. You got to explore other options. And I always talk to my wife and try to get a little bit of an opinion about something if I feel strongly about it, because usually there's a way to see it from over here too, and it could work just as well. It's just not the way you would have done it, maybe.
Well, the thing, in our case with Donald, he needed a lot of hand-holding at the beginning, because he was very, he wasn't angry. He was hurt.
Insecure,
and he was a little hurt because he felt he wasn't loved, and he needs to be. He's a guy who needs to be loved. He's a wonderful actor. Yeah. So I became the love object. I had to take care of him, and I did. I spent a lot of time with him, and I tried to make him feel comfortable. And look, by the time we got a little bit into it, when Robert saw what he was delivering, Robert Towne saw what he was getting, he realized that Donald was great, and Donald was the right guy. And I don't know if he ever apologized to him, because he never told Robert he didn't want him to be in the movie. But there was a vibe that you could feel that he was less than enthusiastic at the beginning, and then got very enthusiastic as we moved forward. Yeah. But it took Donald a while, because he had look, I'll tell you a funny story about Donald. Donald was would be driven to set, and one day we finished shooting, and Donald is very, very knowledgeable, as many actors aren't, about what lenses are being used in every scene. So he would say to Conrad Hall, he says, "Don't use the 35 on me. I look terrible with that lens. I need a 50, whatever." I mean, who knew? But he knows.
Right.
And he was talking about that kind of thing. And of course, Connie, who is, he doesn't take shit from anybody.
Right.
He would just say, don't worry about it. It's not your problem, and you don't say that to Donald, because it just made him more resistant. He would get more, you could see him. And he also had certain rules, which were not wrong. I mean, nobody could smoke anywhere near the set because he hated that. I did too, but I was glad he was the one who was saying it, so that any crew person, he would come in and he'd look around. He said, someone was smoking in here. I said, no, they weren't. We've told them all they're not. If they're going to smoke, they're going to be outside someplace far away. He says, I don't think so. You had to give in. Okay. So one day we finished shooting and he's angry at Connie because Connie has not paid attention to him when he's talking about the lenses. He knows all about the lenses. And I said, look, his car hadn't arrived to take him home from where we were, which was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes from the hotel we were staying at. So I said, come on with me. I'll drive you back. So he said, okay. So he gets in my car and we drive back. And all the way, he's giving me a litany of complaints about this. Oh, the guys are really smoking. They don't respect me. Connie doesn't pay attention when I tell him things. It's like, yes, Donald, okay. I get it. And I'm trying to be very, very nice and pacifying as much as I can, realizing this is just a moment he's going through and he'll get through it. Anyway, we pull up to the hotel after I've been listening to his complaints all the way, and there's stairs going up into the hotel, and there's a woman, kind of a homeless woman in rags, walking down the stairs. Somehow she had wandered into the hotel room, and the one of the bus boys or somebody in the front of the hotel told her to leave. So she's walking out as I'm walking in, and Donald Sutherland is right next to me. And he's finished his litany of complaints, and he's just starts to walk up the stairs, and this woman is coming down the stairs, and she looks up, and she sees him, and she says, Donald Sutherland. She said, and he lit up like, all of a sudden somebody recognized him we're in the middle of Oregon, who knows? And this woman sees him, and she says, Donald Sutherland. And he comes up with this big smile, and she points at him and she says, who cares? Get a life, And he literally crumbled and laughed. No, I mean, it was like this wonderful moment. No, but he laughed. But he laughed, he realized, he laughed. He said, oh my God. He says, I can't believe that just happened. He says, I must be taking myself too seriously.
Yeah, maybe God's trying to tell you something.
And it just calmed him down, But it was a funny thing.
That's great.
He probably thought I sent him there.
Right. All right, we got to get this guy in check here. Some producers might do something like that to get their actor to behave.
No.
That's great. Well, that's another thing, and I think we'll wrap it up here. Sure. But I think that's one thing that I always am very strongly reminded of when we're producing anything is that the balancing of egos and everybody's proud of their job, and the DP doesn't want to hear from the actor, the director doesn't want to hear from the actor doesn't want to hear from anybody, but at the same time everybody has to work together and make this thing happen, so that can sometimes be a
it's the key. I mean, I think one of the things I learned on that movie particularly was you can have great people in each department. That's not enough. You have to have great people who can work together, because we had a set decorator on the movie who didn't like the designer. The designer didn't hire her. They hired somebody around him, and she didn't like him, and she kept poisoning the water around him. And even though she was a great decorator, there was no doubt about that. Paula came to me one day. We're on the set, and she had heard so much from this woman, and she believed her. And she said, I think we need to fire Bill Creeber, who was the designer. And I said, what? I said, no. We're not firing Bill Creeber. I said, I knew what was going on. I said, no, we're going to fire the decorator. And she said, really? And I said, yeah, we got to fire the decorator, because she's a cancer. She's just ruining. She's ruining everything. She may be very good at what she does, but she doesn't work and play well with others, and she's the one who has to go. And Paul said, oh, really? I said, yeah. I mean, I've been watching this. She said, okay, whatever you say. And I fired her, which I hate doing. It's not something I ever enjoy doing.
You got to do it. Yeah.
Especially somebody who is talented, who is really good at what they do, but just doesn't have the big picture and and it was just one of those things. I had to go and find somebody else and bring somebody else in.
I think one piece of advice I got from a producer when I came here almost 20 years ago now, but I struggled with my ego. I started as an editor, and I would always get butthurt. You come in, you watch the cut that I spent 45 minutes refining one little thing, and you come in here, it's like, lose that. That doesn't work. And you're like, what? But and then I started doing other things, and I was always very proud of my work. And then the one thing he said, Daniel, listen, your attachment to your project is gonna kill you. You just have to answer one question: is this best for the film? Is this best for the project? Everything you do, everybody you hire, every fire, all that stuff. That it's not about you. It's not about me, the director, anybody.
But not every. I mean, it takes a while for almost everybody to learn that because you're always. I mean, everybody when they arrive are they're concerned about themselves. They're concerned about their department, and they have to. I mean, I think that the role of a producer, one of the major roles of the producer, is to bring those diverse elements together and make sure they work together. And I've been in situations more than once where major people didn't work out together, and you had to make a change that was painful, wasn't what you wanted to do at the outset, but it was the right thing to do to make the movie work. And also to make your life as a producer palatable, because I mean, if you're spending all your time watching somebody who you want to make sure they're not screwing up or they're not doing something that's going to hurt the tissue of what the film is, that takes a lot of energy, and you don't want to do that. I mean, I tend to like on films to when I bring in a department head, I want them to deal with their department, and what I'm trying to do is give them the trust from me to know that their department is their job, and I trust them to do it right. And in order to do that, they got to work with the other departments too. That's just what it is.
That's so true. Yeah. We were doing a feature in 2016 or something, a little low budget thing, under $1 million, and it was a very tight schedule. 21 days. They were selling the location. We had no opportunity to reshoot. Didn't have the budget for any. There were horses, and it was a ranch, so it was a very unique situation, and we went for it. And the sound lady. Was her and a boom up, right? So one day I walked in, and the producer of the film's a really good friend of mine, and I was there also kind of I'm a producer on it too, but I wasn't the main producer. And he's it's decent sized crew, maybe 60 people running around and stuff. So he's making sure everything's going well, but he's not a very technical guy. I am. I've done almost I've done almost every job on set. I've held a boom mic, I've edited, I've shot stuff, and so I walk in to the location, and I know that they're shooting upstairs, the bedroom scene, and the sound lady is sitting downstairs on the couch, she's got her headphones in and her mixer. And I'm like, they're shooting upstairs, right? And she's like, yeah, I have Steph up there, whatever. And I'm like, but you're the sound person. They're shooting upstairs, right? And she, she was just kind of sitting there, and I think she was eating something while they're shooting. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look into this a little bit. This seems weird. I don't trust that, right? And I go upstairs. And in the boom up is there working, but the boom up's really young, and I don't mind young people at all. Yeah. But I'm thinking, you're not the one I'm going to trust for pristine audio here, right? So there was this humming going on, and G&E had put the generator right next to the wall on the outside of the wall of the room they were filming in, and it was subtle, but it was like,
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, are you picking up the generator? And it's like, yeah, but it's like, okay, all right, So I went to my buddy who's the producer. I'm like, this sound girl, and get rid of them. This is crazy. They're gonna ruin your movie. We don't have money to fix this kind of shit in post. Get G&E to move the generator and have somebody who actually cares about this movie record the sound.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, oh, you're crazy. We were a week in, and we only have 10. I don't know any other. I'm like, let's make some phone calls. I can get somebody here by tomorrow. I mean, their day rate might be higher because whatever. But we got somebody in, let him go, and it worked itself out. And that first week of footage took a lot of damn effort to fix. And at least we had maybe another 14 days or so of clean stuff. But case in point, like, you don't want to disrupt a machine that's in motion, and getting rid of your sound person is a big deal because you can't shoot if you don't have a sound person. But you have to make these choices because, I mean, it's going to bite you in the ass after.
Oh, no question.
So,
and it happens, I mean, those are the things that but nobody, we talked earlier about the fact that nobody really knows what a producer does. Well, I mean, you're dealing with all of those little things if you're doing your job. If you're not doing your job and you're just you're an agent who became a producer and you don't know what, you're just sitting in a chair thinking it's all great. That's one thing. But, from my point of view, I've got to look at I'm constantly watching every department. But the truth is, if I hire a good designer, costume designer, I'm assuming that person knows what they're doing.
Well,
I figure that the art director knows what they're doing, and they're watching those departments. But if, I'm going to listen to dailies and I'm going to hear sound and I'm going to hear something, and if the sound person thinks that, you can fix that in post, I don't want to hear that.
No.
I don't want to fix it. I mean, I may have to, but I don't want to.
Yeah. Why don't you fix it now?
No, you don't need a key. It's just that it's stuck. The bottom is stuck. Kick it a couple of times and it might open. It's just because of the water.
It's like a good CEO. You're a good producer because you care about hiring well.
Yep.
And then just making sure that it works. And that allows you to have time to actually review people's work as opposed to, like you said, micromanaging everybody.
And it lets me sleep.
And it lets you sleep.
I sleep at night.
Good CEO. You have these interviews with Bill Gates and with Steve Jobs, and everything they say is, well, how do you become such a successful CEO? Well, you hire better people around you. It's
that's always the case.
What's a good director? Well, cast the movie well. they'll do a pretty good job then. A good producer too.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Those are exactly. That's that's the biggest part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth of it is, and that's one of the reasons why there's this kind of tension that may go between a studio or even a bond company and a producer. It's that you're. You know what you're doing. They're wondering. They don't really know what's going on, but they're looking for everything that's wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's tricky. You have to develop a tolerance for people wanting to look over your shoulder who don't know what you do.
Yeah.
And they don't know why you're doing it.
Right. Which is why it tends to be easier to build momentum in a lane in the industry. If you do an action film, it's easier to get another action film because all the people you've sort of validated that,
That's
right?
true.
But if you go, try and do a comedy now, it's like I've never seen anything funny. Then you have to kind of start all over again.
Well, that's certainly true, and it's the rare director, certainly not. I wouldn't say producer, but more director who can do both comedy, action, drama. They're all different and they all have different requirements, and not everybody can do all of those things. And for me as a producer, I like to do all different kinds of things, and we'll talk about a comedy next time, and about how that movie. But those are different tasks. They work differently, and I don't have to be funny, but I have to know what's funny, and I have to know who's funny if I'm going to do a comedy.
Right.
And when I'm doing a drama, again, I'm relying on the quality of the people who are supporting me.
Yeah.
I'm on their shoulders, really.
Right.
So that's the way it works.
Good note to finish on.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Next time. All right, man.
It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you. By that point, Mel is not making any more movies, really. I mean, he's done with his directing career.
Yeah.
And he said, well, as I told you, he said, if we can get a great person to write the music, I'd consider it. So.